Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Leaf. It's so nice to have you all here. Thank you for tuning in for this, what I know is going to be a very enlightening conversation with our guest this week. I'm so excited to have Jeff Lopes here. Welcome so much to the show, Jeff. I just want to take a minute to introduce you. So Jeff is a proud father of two, a husband and an entrepreneur for the past 26 years. He's founded numerous companies from inception to 7- and 8-figure corporations. Included in these is True Blue Homes, a portfolio of vacation and commercial rental properties across the northern parts of Ontario, Canada, and Kimura Wear, a boxing and martial arts equipment brand that was founded in early 2006 out of his own basement. Currently, Jeff is a host of a top-rated entrepreneurial podcast titled Jeff Knows Inc. And over the past 4 years, he's coached countless entrepreneurs in balancing the obstacles of fatherhood and entrepreneurship and achieving a higher levels of success in both areas. As fitness leadership college graduate and a certified NLP master and life coach, Jeff is also a best-selling author, and he's going to talk a little bit about his books with us today. And where we're going to focus is Jeff, in the midst of his very busy life, lost his father. It'll be a year on May 7th. And so, Jeff, welcome to our podcast today.
Thank you for having me. This is a conversation I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. It is something that I think the more people expand and talk about grief and just loss, it just helps people unite and understand and be able to go through it more together than just alone, right?
Absolutely. And, I talked to you a little bit before we started recording that grief can really, it derails people's lives. And of course, today we're going to be talking about you and the way that you've handled your own grief journey in the midst of balancing all of the things in your life. Because I think often when there is grief of any kind, right? It doesn't just have to be the death of a human. It can be a divorce, the loss of a job, anything that sort of tips our world and things that we're not expecting. But I think when we lose somebody who's been a cornerstone of our life, that we feel very lost and are not quite sure how to navigate our new world order after this hole that has been left in our life. So I would love just to open up the conversation about maybe talking to us about your relationship with your father. And we can sort of then, more organically have a conversation around what that grief journey has looked like over the past 10 months for you.
Yeah. So as time has gone on, it's been just about 10 months since he's passed. The more time has gone on, the more I kind of realized how lucky I was and how I had the opportunity to have a great relationship with my dad, which a lot of people don't have. I was your typical 45-year-old busy, I had my own life, my own kids, but my relationship with my dad was very close to me. I was the 45-year-old that would talk to my dad 3 times a day on the phone. And this is steadily. I would call him on the way to work every morning. We'd have a conversation. Before I go to bed, we usually have a conversation. Middle of the day, I went on the way home. I usually give him a call, see how he's doing. So I went on this journey of years and years of having this close relationship. And then all of a sudden it was gone.
So your relationship was ever present in your world. Was your dad also an entrepreneur? Were your conversations around your business? Was it personal? Like, what role did he play in your life?
Just being present. I think that is the most important thing, and probably the thing I've taken the most from my relation with my dad and passed on to my relation with my kids. Something I try to take on to my other fathers that I coach or deal with, or just friends in general. Is just every once in a while, look down at your feet, enjoy the moment, be present. My father was a factory worker, worked 30 years at Ford Motors factory, worked on the assembly line, 2 weeks day, 2 weeks night. So 2 weeks a month, I would barely see my dad. It would just be on passing when he worked night shift. But back then, and I always tell the stories, back then, you could have worked weekends, you could have worked overtime and made time and a half, triple time. And back then, working at Ford Motors, you're making 30 something bucks an hour. So you could have made really, really good money. But one thing my dad did is never worked weekends, barely ever worked overtime. So the weekends were very precious for his family time. So he'd always spend time with his family. Another thing he would do is he would block all his vacation Instead of spreading out throughout the year to have breaks, he would block it all in, sacrifice 11 months of the year working like a dog so he could spend 4 weeks every summer with us. And we'd jump in the car from Toronto, Canada, drive up to Cape Cod and spend roughly 2.5 to 3 weeks on the beach every summer in Cape Cod. So he built these great memories, these great road trips. He was always present, always there. And we didn't have much. I mean, it was a factory worker. We did well, but we lived very, very lean means. But we had that. I never felt like I missed anything. The love he filled us with, just, it was always enough. We always felt like we had enough, right? So it was a great childhood. I grew up in the 80s where you're outdoors every day. There was no internet. There was no cell phone. So it was a great childhood. And my dad was very present. So, I mean, he was a very active father when he was around. So that instilled a lot of values in myself. So I think I was very lucky in those regards.
So here you are now at 45, and you had this very rich relationship with your dad, because we know that when somebody dies, the complexity of that grief is in direct correlation to the relationship that we had with that person, right? If we carry guilt or residual anger or whatnot. So you had this amazing relationship with your dad. You talked several times a day, and you said that he died unexpectedly. What happened to your dad?
So it was never smoked, never drank, power walked almost every day. And it was May 6th. I gave him a call. It was around 10:30 at night. We had a conversation on the phone. And I got that call at 6 in the morning it was May 7th. And you always hear when you get a call at 6 in the morning, it's usually not a good call.
Yeah, you're going to make me cry because that's exactly right. That's the first thing. Your heart beats really fast and you're like, what? Now, is your mother still alive?
Yeah, my mom's still alive and she's strong and doing well. So I'm lucky on that aspect. And my sister, for some reason, stayed over the night. A couple of days, she was busy. She was working. And that night, she was over the night prior in my parents' house. And she ended up watching a movie late with them and ended up crashing in one of the spare rooms. So she's the one that called me at 6 in the morning saying Dad had collapsed and the ambulance had arrived. And I'm about a 40-minute drive from my parents. I literally jumped in my car, got down there in about 14 minutes. And when I got there, it was a little too late. The EMS was walking out the door. And as I was running past them, they wouldn't give me eye contact. So you just got that really uncomfortable feeling. I walked in my parents' home and my mom was on the right side in a living area. And she looked at me and she said, "You're too late." And my reaction was, "What do you mean I'm too late?" And I looked across and I saw the police officer and I'm like, "Where's Dad?" And he's like, "He's up in your parents' room, but you can't go there till the coroner comes." I literally ran right past him. I ran upstairs. I locked the bedroom door. My dad he was already obviously passed lying on the floor. He had a heart attack, massive heart attack. And I jumped on the floor. I locked the door because the cop tried to come behind me. He didn't want me to touch the body. And I grabbed my dad and I held him in my arms for about 15, 20 minutes. And I probably kissed him about probably 400 or 500 times. And that image, which I'm so happy I had, but that image also haunts me. That image in my head haunts me because that was my last real memory of him. And yeah, so it was hard. You always hear people say you never want to see a loved one suffer. But maybe because it didn't happen to me, in my head, at least I would be able to have some closure with it. I would be able to say my goodbyes. There was no moment there. I was talking to him and the next minute he was gone. And the first 76 days, I visited the cemetery every single day. And my dad loved crossword puzzles. So before Christmas, I had bought this book. It was like 700 pages of crosswords. And I took it from my mom's house. He had gone through about 15, 20 pages of it. And I would go there and do 2 crossword puzzles at the cemetery every day for the first 75 days. And I've cut it down to like once or twice. But loss is one of those things where you could prepare yourself, but you're never ready. And you could try to justify it saying he lived a good life. He was 75 years old. He saw his grandkids. He saw both his kids very successful. My sister is successful. I'm successful. But you always wish you had a little bit more time.
Always.
You always wish you had one more day with him. You had one more time to say something more to him. Even though which is really, really special is my dad was one of those harder European guys. and wasn't very affectionate in the way where he wasn't kissing. Like with my kids, I don't care. My 13-year-old boy, I'm hugging and kissing him all the time. I'm squeezing him. I'm hugging him in front of public. I'm kissing him on his cheek. I couldn't care. My dad wasn't like that. But as I would say the last 5-6 years, as he got older and as he became very close to my kids, so his grandkids, and he started softening up a bit, we became very, it was okay to start saying, I love you. It was okay. Every time I see him, I give him a big kiss on his forehead. Our relationship changed almost like that cycle of life where it was okay to do these things where when I was a kid, he never did to me. I was doing to him now. So yeah, it's been 10 months where I think I've dealt with it as well as I could, because I haven't stopped from talking about it. I talk to everybody about my dad. It probably doesn't pass a day I don't tell a story of my dad to somebody. I allow myself the opportunity to remember him, but it also doesn't stop a day that I want to pick up the phone and still call him.
So let's talk about, you've said so many beautiful, poignant things around when someone's passing. One is, my listeners know that my brother died, and I interviewed siblings all over the world that had lost a sibling, and some had been estranged from their siblings. Some, it was their very best friend. And as I said earlier, I think the way we deal with our grief has a lot to do with that last conversation or our relationship. And you had said, when you don't want to watch someone suffer, but yet when someone is suffering from cancer or whatnot, you get to say all the goodbyes, right? During that process. I call it anticipatory grief. That we all know that we're going to die someday, but anticipatory grief, when someone is actually actively dying, is different. You get to have those conversations.
Yeah.
Does it help when they've died? I think it is a different kind of grieving from what I've learned from people that I have spoken to and the grief and loss groups that I have run. But for you, when you had such a deep connection to your father and talked to him numerous times a day, and he died very unexpectedly, 75, of course, today is not old. Men and women also grieve differently. I know that is a blanket statement, but it's also been my experience. Can you talk to our listeners? What did early grief look like for you? Everything from writing your children's stories. I want you to talk about that. Those were inspired, I am sure. What did it look like with your family, your spouse, your children, your work? What did that grief look like? And how did it impact you in your other relationships?
I've always been the type, and maybe this is my entrepreneurial mindset or DNA or whatever you want to call it. I've always been the type when a moment, a trigger point, something in life that happens, I've always been able to take that energy and focus that energy into something creative. Every time in my life, from a young age, if something were to be really, really upsetting me or bothering me or just hanging on to me, or I couldn't take it on my head, I would focus that energy and really push it towards whether it's working out or towards building something. And when my father passed away, that at first it was an anger. Like everybody goes through different emotions. I think it was an anger where I felt I should have seen those signs. I was blaming myself.
What do you mean signs? Are you saying that he had some health issues?
Physical signs. So in the last 3-4 months, his tummy was a little bigger. And I used to joke with him. I go, what the hell's wrong with you? He's like, don't worry. It's the winter and it's gained a little pounds. In the summer, I'll be more active and I'll get rid of it. The issue was due to COVID, he wasn't doing his regular physicals. So he would call his doctors. If everything would be over the phone. Hey, Joe, how you feeling? You doing good? Okay, good. Call me in 3 months. If he was doing his normal, actual ECGs, his regular, this would have been detected a long time ago. So what happened was his valve was slowing down. He was very tired, especially the last month. He was always like, I just want to go to bed a little earlier today. I'm really tired. It's been a long winter. So it was a situation where his valve was slowing down. His body was building up sodium. He was retaining water. So it was a process of probably about 2-3 months this was happening, and nobody really knew. And because he never saw the doctor because of COVID, because there's no in-person visits here, especially in Toronto, Canada, it was so restricted. So after the fact, I saw these signs and I realized, how did I not see this? So I put this blame on myself. That was the first thing. The second was I had this built-in energy where I'm going to say this, in my head, I was upset with my sister, my mom, because I was like, how'd you guys not give him more CPR? I kind of wanted to blame everybody. Why? didn't anybody else help him? If I was there, I could have done CPR. I could have got it till the ambulance got there. Ambulance took 16 minutes to get there. Why did it take so long? Like there's so many things where I was just so upset. The night before, I know he was really, really tired. When I talked to him, in my head, I was blaming him. I was like, if you felt something, why didn't you call the doctor? Why didn't you go to the hospital? So I had all these things. I was just pushing the blame on everybody, on myself, but it was just this blame game of how could this been prevented? And then I started realizing that I can't be taking this energy, this negativity. It's just going to kill me inside. And that's when I literally penned the paper 6 days later, and I wrote 6 children's books in memory of my dad. And I thought, you know what? He was always trying to teach lessons to my kids. So I took 6 lessons that I thought he taught to my kids. And I wrote these books called Grandpa Joe's Adventures. And each one was a lesson. And the characters in their books are just my dad, my 2 kids, Tiago and Sierra. And they're all in loving memory of him. And I started to really focus my energy on doing things where, you know what, he's no longer here. Let me try to keep his legacy alive. And I started the books. I started talking a lot more podcasts. I was making sure I was telling everybody I could about him and about his legacy, about his story. And I started on this mission of just thinking that I got to let that energy produce a gratitude of our moments together and let everybody know what a wonderful man he was. And that's been my journey for the last 9.5 months or so.
And I want to stop you there because this is so beautiful, because one of the things I talk about, and I wrote a whole dissertation on, is writing through grief and loss, because it allows us to get things out of our head, out of our heart, and onto paper. And this idea of shifting our energy, because grief, there's this beautiful quote, I unfortunately can't remember who said it, but it wasn't me, but that grief is love with no place to go. And I think that when we're grieving, of course, we want to do the blame game, and we go through the different stages of grief. They're not linear. Not everyone goes through all the different stages. Not everyone feels anger. Not everyone feels guilt. But I think that it can take us a while to get to a point of true acceptance, and I think one thing that no one ever tells us about grief is that sometimes it can get harder before it gets easier, because it takes a while for the reality to sink in that the person that we love is not here on the physical plane anymore. And what I love that you said that very early on, and maybe it is that you're an entrepreneur, and that you're used to taking this abundance of energy and creating, because creating, it's what the universe wants us to do. The universe is constantly in creation. And that if we don't do something, grief is energy. That is what it is. And it can feel very dark. It can feel very heavy. And I have the image of heaviness when we are in bed and we pull the shades and the blanket over our head and we don't have the energy to move, right? Yeah. And so when I'm working with people around grief and loss, one of the very first things I say is, even when you don't want to move, I don't care if it's a walk to your mailbox or if it's taking a shower, move the energy. The energy needs to move. And so very early on, for you to take this energy and to pour it into children's stories in the honor of your father and the messages that you learned. This is the feeling that I got. I feel things that it helped to lift that darkness of the loss. So can you talk to us about what it felt like for you when you were taking this grief and you were taking this energy? It's transformational, right? Because you're transforming it into something beautiful. What did it feel like in that grieving process, if you can possibly put words to it?
One thing, I always had that mindset, and I adopted this into almost my psyche, almost my mindset was from a very young age, where others around you are going to always in life bring you down. There's victims. They're always going to take your energy. And I've always had that mindset where you are your own person. You're the only one that can control how you react to other people or react to the world. So I've always had that mindset. And every once in a while you slip out of that mindset, but I quickly push myself usually back into it, where I have control of how I feel. I have control of how I allow others to make me feel. I have control of how the grief is going to affect me. Am I going to sit there and be a victim? Am I going to sit there and allow myself to get into a depressed state, which what you said, when you're in bed and you don't want to get out of bed, that's a depression. That's what millions of people around the world are going through on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
But you also have to understand you are the only one that can change that. And I think I've always had that ability to understand that I had the control. I had the final control. So I quickly realized that this was just another moment of my life. I'm a strong believer that we go through different seasons in life. And in certain seasons, you're going to have more energy towards your work. Certain seasons, you're going to have more energy towards your children. This was a season that I had to put a lot more energy towards myself and understanding that it was okay to grieve, but I needed to take that energy of grief and use it towards something positive. Because it's so easily, and it's such a fine line to take that energy of grief and put yourself under a blanket and not want to get out of bed, or waking up and moving, like you said, and going to the gym and doing things that are active. And we have to realize that I'm a very active person. I've been working on my whole, gosh, since I was 15, 16, I don't think I've stopped more than 2-3 days from working out. So, and I'm 45, and I was going through a stage where the gyms were closed with COVID. So I didn't have that outlet. So within days, I literally really focused on really building up our basement gym and doing different things that keep active. So it's a separation of just understanding which side of the line do you want to be on, and having a clarity that if you are on the positive side, if you are moving, you're going to feel better. Your energies feel better. The people around you are going to be around, want to be around you. So it's this whole holistic side of it, right? If you're coming out negative and depressed, that also affects everybody around you. Having young children, I didn't want to put them through that as well. It's hard enough that they were grieving a grandfather that they had a very close relationship with in their own way. To them, death is a little different because they don't have that understanding of life yet to the fullest. So they're going through it in their own way. And as a dad, I was trying to deal with them. I was also trying to be that strong anchor now to my sister and my mom. Now I had taken on the role of not one family, I've taken on the role of the male of two families.
Yes.
So my mom and sister, sorry about that, my mom and sister actually came and lived with me for a little while as well. So it was a situation where when my dad passed, and this is my entrepreneurial mindset, and this kicked in, my mom and sister were mentally paralyzed. They were stopped. I dealt with the coroner. I dealt with the police. I dealt with the funeral arrangements. I dealt with the cemetery. I dealt with the tombstones. I dealt with insurances. I dealt with life insurance. I dealt with properties. I dealt with lawyers. I dealt with everything. I took on everything. And I realized I had to, because I had the energy and I knew how to focus my energy. Everybody else was going through their own moment of grief. So I said, let me just really take this off everybody else's plate. And I put it onto my plate. And it probably wasn't smart at that moment because it was a lot on me because I was burning from both sides of the candle. At the same time, I realized that my presence and my energy had to be at such a high vibration, a high level to keep everybody else kind of almost carrying everybody with me at that moment. And that's what I did. I took that on. And I'm glad I did at that moment because it helped take a lot of pressure off a lot of people at that moment.
And I'll say this too, and you can tell me if this is true or not, because there are the doers, right? I took on that very same role when my brother died, and my brother and I took that role on when my mom died. And there are the doers, and everybody plays a role, I think, when somebody in our life passes. And, you know, again, you're that get up and go kind of guy. So the doing probably came very natural to you. And I'll also say that at least this was true for me. It kept me moving so I didn't get that paralyzation. I did later. I'm not going to say I did not, because I write about that very poignantly in my book of how my brother's death really did kind of debilitate me for a while. But the doing early on also, I think, helps with that initial shock of loss. And I think the other thing that I wanted to ask you, because I feel this also plays into grief and loss, is our belief of the afterlife if we have one. People are all over the place with what happens to the soul, if you think there is a soul. So can you kind of ground us in what your belief is around, or if you believe there is an afterlife, or what happens when someone dies?
I'm not, I was never brought in a very religious household. My parents were never very religious. So I don't take it on a religious size. I do believe in certain aspects of life, like karma and what you put out to the world will come back to you in tenfold and energy and stuff like that. So I have certain understandings and beliefs of that. I've never really questioned it. I mean, we can sit here all day and understand and question why we're even here, right? I mean, there's so many questions to life. I can't say I have a strong belief in afterlife, but I don't question it because I don't know it either.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where I just kind of just let be. But I am a strong believer that my dad is still around us. I talk to my dad on a regular basis. And I want people to understand too, is I might come across as a very strong entrepreneur. And man, there's been times where, and this has been so many times until today. I mean, this past week, I was driving, I had a 2.5-hour drive, and I was seeing my dad and I was crying to myself. So it is okay to cry. It is okay to let it out. There is moments I'll be in the car and I miss him so much, I'll just scream out loud. Like, it's okay to let those things out.
Thank you.
We're not all perfect. And I have those moments, and I've had tons of those moments. I think of my dad on a regular basis. I have dreams of my dad all the time. I literally dream of my dad I probably have about 4 or 5 good dreams of him a week without even questioning till today. So he's still very present in my mind. He's still very active in my mind. So it's okay to grieve. It's okay to cry. You don't have to man up as a guy. You don't have to be all tough around everybody. It's okay to cry. It's okay to show emotion. One thing I've taken from this all, and I've always been a strong believer that we live with no regrets. It's something I push, I talk about a lot, and I preach a lot. I always thought, I should say, that I lived my life with no regrets. I saw my dad, I saw my parents, I spent time with them, I talked to my sister, I talked to my family members, and I had no regrets. And even when you live a life that you think is full of no regrets and you're doing everything you can to live to the max, you still have regrets. There's still things you still want to do. There's things you're going to miss. But I'm a strong believer that a lot of people truly take life for granted. They get busy in their busy lives. They have their kids, they have their job, they have their 9 to 5, and they forget to make those phone calls to those loved ones. They forget to make peace with people, and they argue and break relationships over the dumbest things. I'll elaborate on that in a sec, what I mean by that. But then when the time does come, sometimes it's too late. And then that's when the guilt kicks in. That's when life really sucks. When you just have one word or one thing you want to tell somebody, you know you're never going to be able to tell them again. That's probably the most painful thing to live with.
Amen to that. I mean, I think that, as a therapist, you can imagine, I've heard lots of stories of regret and anger and the way that people beat themselves up after somebody dies, and they think about all the things that the would haves and the could haves and the should haves is what I like to say. And those that pass on, my belief, I've got a deep belief in the afterlife and that they've returned home, if you will. And it's love, right? I believe our energy is pure love. And then the ego kicks in, and this is where we fight and we do these things and we beat ourselves up. And so what I wanted to say, because you said something earlier, about, we can be a victim, that it's in our control. And I believe that that is true. And part of that control is knowing when it's time to get help. Some of us need help to get through grieving, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a pastor, whether it's a grief group, a dear friend, wherever they feel safe, that they can go and, as you said, share that emotion, tell those stories. And to listeners, if you are not sure how to support somebody who is grieving, you know what? It's nothing but presence to hold the space for the pain. That's it.
Yeah.
Right? That's all it is. Like we want
a set of listening ears, I always say.
Yes, a heart. I call it a heart with ears. That's it. That's all we have to do. Yeah. We can't fix it. We can't take pain away. We can't accelerate someone's grieving process, but we can just be present. We don't need the platitudes. There is not a single thing anyone could have said to me after my brother died or my mother that was suddenly going to be like, I feel so much better. Thank you. I just needed to feel. And to have somebody bear witness to that is the most powerful presence. But you were going to share, it was about regret, that if
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have squabbles with people. So please, can you talk to us more about what you mean by that?
Yeah. So I'll give you another example. And since this, what I'm going to describe happened, I've actually told this story on a few different men's groups that I've been invited to speak panels. And it is crazy that I will get calls or messages within the week or two. People are like, thank you for that. Like, I made peace with this, or I made that phone call. My uncle and my dad had an incredible relationship. Growing up, my uncle was always at our house. My dad's brother, always at our house, always around. When their dad passed away suddenly in Portugal, and my grandfather was the only other entrepreneur in the family. Besides myself, it was my grandfather. He was a philanthropist. He was a real estate developer. He did extremely well for himself in Portugal. Both his sons came to Canada for a better life for their kids, but he stayed in Portugal and was an incredible entrepreneur. When he passed away, there was money involved, and money is the evil when it comes to families. I'm a strong believer in money. Money could just destroy families.
And
And
has.
my dad was always the type where he didn't care about money. He never gave a rat's ass about money. As long as he had enough to get means by and he lived a comfortable, relaxed life, he was happy. And when that all happened, properties went up. And long story is, my uncle did a lot of inappropriate things at a really inappropriate time. And I don't want to get into too much detail with that, but they stopped talking. And my uncle did a lot of things to my dad. But years passed, and I would tell my dad all the time, I go, pick up the phone, call your brother. It is what it is. Life goes on. Just make amends with it. And my dad always said, I want to talk to him, but when he's ready to say sorry, the phone's there, let him call, and I'll accept it. And we'll move on. And my uncle never called. Never called. And this is going on to 13 years, never called. And after my dad passed, probably about 3 days, 4 days, I was on my way to see my pops. And there was a letter there taped to his stone. And I opened that and I was like, who put a letter here? And because of COVID, the funeral was only allowed 10 people. My dad has so many friends, so many people wanted to come, but they couldn't come. And I opened up the letter, and it was my uncle. He was there, and he wrote a letter. And in the letter, saying sorry, and he wished he had come in person earlier to say sorry and all this stuff. And he broke down and all this. And I was like, why couldn't you have done this earlier? It killed me. It angered me. It pissed me off. But at the same time, I felt good because at least he did it. But that really made me understand where my uncle's going to live the rest of his life with that regret.
Yes.
And it's something where I'm very passionate of teaching other people, like, grab the phone. Life's too short. We are just here on a little walk through a pasture. We don't know how long we have. Every time you walk out that door, you don't know if you're coming back home that day. Make amends. And also, I'm a strong believer too, where there's a lot of people in your life. This is even another topic altogether that don't need to be in your life.
Yeah, it's clipping out those that no longer serve us, right? Absolutely.
Yes.
Hardest thing in the world to do, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you've had that friend since the 5th grade and they're dragging you down. And yet there's this obligation to keep the people in your life. This happens too when there is a death in your life. It sort of just sweeps everything away. Countless stories of people who have clipped people out of their life after a death because you start weeding the garden because you simply don't have the capacity for it anymore. Who shows up in a time when we really are on our knees, literally on our knees? And it's unfortunate that it has to take a tragedy sometimes to get us there.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that, as you were just talking about, are people that matter so deeply to us. Something happens and we stand in our righteousness and we wait for the apology that never comes. And yet it takes so much of our energy because this person that we love, we still think about. It takes up mental energy, either hanging on to whatever we think this person did to us, right? Like standing in that righteousness, all of that takes up energy. And short of physical and sexual abuse, I think to really stand back and ask ourselves, because the forgiveness is never about the person, right? The forgiveness is our ability to let go and to move on. And, and so I think that, but then we've got these people that we've got this argument with, that we love, and that we could be having this rich relationship with, but we're too stuck in that I'm right and I'm waiting for that apology. So I think it took tremendous courage for your uncle to write the letter.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, did you have a conversation with your uncle?
I haven't, and I'll give you the reason why. And there's been a few times I've wanted to reach out to him, and when the time is right, I will reach out to him. I think he put so much stress on my parents, their relationship, everything about them for so long, that I feel like if I reach out to him now, it's going to put a lot of pain on my mom, even though it shouldn't, but I think it would. So when the time is right, I mean, I've had this conversation with my mom, and I said, listen, sooner or later, I am going to reach out to him. I do want to talk to him. I do want to have a conversation with him, whether it's one conversation where we reopen our relationship, which I would actually like to have. Because I'm a strong believer, is like, we talked about this and I said this a million times here, it's just, life's too short. You control your emotions, you control your own feelings, you control how you feel around people. No one has any control over your control. The minute somebody even tells you you're wrong or you're not good enough, they're controlling you. If you allow that to feel inside you, they're controlling you. But in the end of the day, we are the only ones that can control ourselves. And the minute we learn how to master that, life gets so much better. So I'm a strong believer that I do understand that. So I think I do have the emotional capacity at this moment to talk to my uncle and rebuild a relationship. It's still very fresh for my mom, and I don't want her to feel like I'm almost going against her. And I've had this conversation, and it's something we keep having on open conversation dialogue. We've been doing that for a couple months now. And when the time is right, I will reach out to him. But yeah, life is short. It's not worth living with regrets. It is not.
It is not. And, there's just so many points that you've made today that I'm really hoping listeners hear and can put into practice in their own lives. And for all of you that are in different stages of grief, honor your process. As Jeff said so eloquently, you can scream, you can cry. That also is moving energy. Don't suck it in, let yourself, I always say, like, give yourself the space and the grace to grieve the person who you have lost. And if you need help, ask for it. Jeff, we're coming to the top of the hour, and this conversation feels like it's been about 5 minutes long. And I always end my conversations with asking, and I love to ask men this question. It always sounds very different than asking women. But during this period of grief, what does self-care and self-love look like for you?
Taking time for yourself. I think this question is a little different for myself, because I've always, even prior to this, always had that understanding of taking a vacation on a daily basis for yourself. Whether it's reading a book or working out or going for a hike or doing something every single day to fill your cup. Do the whole Oprah filling your cup idea. And I'm a strong believer, if your cup is not filled, if you don't take the time to do everything you can to put yourself at such a high level, you're not going to be able to serve everybody under you. When I'm talking about everybody under you, your family, your wife, your spouse, your partner, your kids, your family, your friends. So I've always had that mindset of taking care of myself before I take care of anybody else. And because of that, it's allowed me to really, like I said, working out, taking pen to paper, journaling. Like, since I started writing, I wrote my dad's books. Prior to that, I had wrote a book, but I've been writing poetry. I've been literally just taking pen to paper, and sometimes I'll just write thoughts in my head and allow it to come together as a poem, right? So it's just writing down, journaling, putting your thoughts on paper, taking care of yourself physically as well, making sure your health is at a high level. Because, I mean, if you don't have your health, you don't have nothing. So just really, really just pouring back into yourself and doing something and doing stuff you love. I think that's the, man, you could pour back as much as you can, but if you're not doing something that's going to put a smile on your face every day, then you're doing something that's wrong.
And, and I think that in grief work, there's this guilt around feeling joy after somebody has passed.
Yeah.
And it's a deep part of the work that I do with people, that the person that is gone, they want us to feel joyful. And
Yeah.
it can take
100%.
and it can take a while to feel that. So if all of you can take what I call turtle steps, like I said, taking a shower, making sure that you're putting food into your body, good food, and that you're doing the small little things at first, just to constantly take care of yourself. Because I promise you, if you move energy, if you're eating, if you're drinking, not alcohol, but water, so that you're staying hydrated, these small things are cumulative and will help you through these dark periods of grief. We are at the top of the hour. And Jeff, can we end by you telling people where they can find you? So maybe your Instagram channel and your website, which is so beautiful. I love your website. I've been all over your website, reading all about you and watching your gorgeous videos of you and your family. So please tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, I'm on all the social media platforms, but I'm most present on IG, Instagram. It's at Jeff Lopes, JEFFLOPES. Website's jeffreylopes.com. And my podcast is Jeff Knows Inc., where it's entrepreneurial / entertainment, just conversations. I just love having conversations with people. So it's just high level people that we kind of dive into their being and how they got to where they are.
I want to thank you.
Thank you. And this has been a great conversation. So I appreciate you reaching out to me, and I appreciate your platform, because I think it's something that's needed for a lot of people. So being able to somebody just slap in their AirPods and give a listen to some of your conversation, I think could go a long way in their healing. So I appreciate what you're doing as well.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your stories about your dad. And to all the listeners, thank you for tuning in. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye for now.